Hello, I'm Colleen Pearl, the Cool Crone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of my upcoming videos. In this video, I will be talking about the cycle of Saturn and Uranus. I will focus on the square between Saturn and Uranus that is happening 3 times in 2021, in February, in June, and in December. We've witnessed the influence on our country of Saturn-Uranus cycle. It's profound, and I think it bears looking into quite a bit. So in this video, I'm going to bring together some historical aspects and show you how astrology has affected the country in the past, and we'll do some speculation about how Saturn and Uranus will affect our country in the future. The planet Saturn, first of all, it's a big, big planet. And it has these gorgeous rings that float around it. They don't really float, they orbit. The rings are actually made up of the same matter as the planet itself, plus a lot of space dust and space debris. The moons also orbit the planet. The rings move, and they move around the planet in an orbit, just like a planet would go around the sun. It takes Saturn almost 30 years to go through each sign of the zodiac. It spends about 2.5 years in each sign. And so in your lifetime, you will have probably at least 2 Saturn returns. Saturn is the taskmaster. He teaches us lessons in life. He gives rewards, but he makes us really, really pay for them up front. So Saturn is delay. Saturn is structure. Saturn is form. Saturn is building. So wherever Saturn is in your chart, there may be fear, or there may be a feeling of lack, a feeling of not quite good enough in that area of your life. But Saturn gives you a chance through various tasks in your lifetime to build up your confidence in that area or to learn in that area so that you can achieve and conquer your fear or your feeling of lack in your lifetime. And this is the reward that Saturn gives. Saturn also gives rewards for hard work, although they are delayed. For instance, if you have Saturn in your 7th house, it's very likely that you won't marry young in life, but more than likely, you will either marry later in life or you may even marry an older person. Remember, Saturn rules time. Then we have the beautiful planet Uranus that orbits to us on its side. To Uranus, it's perfectly normal. And if we look, we have a couple of moons that are visible here. There's actually 14 moons to Uranus. These little spots, these are probably from the sun. These are probably reflections of the sun. Uranus also has these rings, and they're made up the same way that Saturn's rings are. They are particles that are the same material as the planet, and also dust from space and space debris, and they orbit the planet just like the planet orbits the sun. Uranus is not nearly as big as Saturn, but still it's big enough to have 14 moons and rings. And by virtue of these rings, this was the first tip-off to scientists that the orbit of Uranus was very, very different. In fact, the North and South poles are going this way on this planet. Now, Uranus takes 84 years to get through each of the zodiac signs. That's a long time. That means that in your lifetime, you most likely will not have a Uranus return unless you live to the age of about 85. Uranus brings chaos, surprise, change, rebellion. It's the place in your chart where you need to be an individual, and also where for instance, I have Uranus in my 7th house, so I tend to attract unusual individuals to me for relationships. I also find that I need to be very free in a relationship. I need to have a lot of freedom. I need to express myself and be an individual, and that's all Uranus influence. Uranus can also bring explosive actions. Wherever Uranus falls in the USA chart or in a personal chart, it's going to be chaotic, but not just chaos for chaos sake. It's very hard to predict what Uranus is actually going to bring to an individual or to a country. Uranus' aim is to decondition you from all of the conditioning that you have had in your life thus far. So wherever you have had, I don't want to say brainwashing, but wherever you have had, wherever you've been conditioned to think a certain way, believe certain things, act a certain way. At certain times when Uranus hits sensitive points in your chart, it's going to force you to rethink that or put you in a situation where those norms just don't serve you and you have to act in a different way. And this is the way Uranus gets you to be sort of deprogrammed. And the purpose of Uranus is not just to make you miserable in your life and feel unsure of how to act, but it is to help you get to your own purest essence. And that's really a cool thing, I think, about Uranus. Another thing that Uranus will do, and this is especially true when it is transiting one of your personal planets, is it will shatter that area of life. Wherever you're stuck, say you're stuck in relationships, Uranus comes along and it shatters it. And the author that I derived this information from specifically uses the word shatter because it's very descriptive of the action of Uranus. It isn't just that it shakes things up, although it does shake things up, but that's not all that it does. It shatters. It literally makes things fall apart, fall to the ground, fall away, so that you have to deal with things in your own individualistic way. There may be violence and protests associated with Uranus because of this, because of all the people needing to be individuals and needing to be heard. The Uranus energy will promote the most progressive, the most current ideas. But remember, we have we have Saturn in the mix here, and Saturn is going to resist all of the newness and all of the rebellious energies. Now I want to talk a little bit about the current cycles. Saturn represents the old, and Uranus definitely represents the new. And where we are in this cycle of Saturn and Uranus right now is in the last square before they finally return to meet in a conjunction in Gemini, which won't be until 2032. About every 11.5 to 12 years, Saturn and Uranus meet up in a particular aspect. And this year, 2021, they're meeting up in the square aspect, which means that one planet is in a sign at a 90-degree angle to the other planet in a sign. And this is a stressful aspect. This is why the cycle of Saturn and Uranus is so important, because when these two planets square, as you can tell from the descriptions I've just given about each of them, they don't mesh very much. It almost seems like oil and water. They just don't go together. They can, and they are. They're working together to help us build better governments, better structures, better mores, better norms for our society that will allow everybody to be an individual and yet to be safe, which is Saturn. Individual is Uranus. The actual aspect that we are going to experience, or that we are experiencing in February, June, and December, is the waning square of this whole process, meaning the end of the cycle square. And this, according to Dane Rudgar, brings about a crisis in consciousness. Now, I think it's very interesting that for the last 4 years, while we had the former president, constantly in the news, you would hear about a constitutional crisis. And these phrases sound very similar to me. A crisis of consciousness and a constitutional crisis. I think it just earmarks the whole era of Saturn-Uranus square, well, the whole year of Uranus-Saturn square in a very ideological way. So this square will give form and expression to eccentric and unconventional ideas. It will create crises to show the weaknesses in our organizations, specifically our governmental organizations. And it'll render obsolete the components that just don't work anymore. It's going to create changes. It already has created some changes, but there's going to be a lot more changes. And remember, this square in June is happening during a Mercury retrograde, so we may not be aware of the effects of this square until much later. Now, the actual conjunction that started the current cycle that we're in occurred in 1988, and it happened in 29 degrees of Sagittarius. 29 degrees of any sign or 0 degrees of any sign is where the sign really displays its full attributes. So Sagittarius in all its glory is being expressed through this whole era for this particular Saturn-Uranus conjunction. So we might say that Sagittarius defines this 45-year period where we are under the influence of the Saturn-Uranus Sagittarius conjunction. So things that happen overseas, very Sagittarian, right? Things having to do with exchanges of ideas, the internet, and again, things being shared with people in other countries. We have had a lot of consternation and difficulty pertaining to trade, and that is also having to do with Sagittarius dealing with other countries. So this cycle that we're in really began after the end of the Cold War, and we define the end of the Cold War colloquially and popularly as the moment when the Berlin Wall came down. And I'm going to talk about the other cycles and how they are defined later, but just to be very clear about the end of the Cold War, this was when our president, then Ronald Reagan, told the head of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." And Mr. Gorbachev did tear down the wall. So in one action, Gorbachev sort of handed the crown to the United States, because in the Cold War, it was the US and the USSR as the two premier world powers. As soon as that wall came down, and it was at the behest of the United States president, we have a situation where the US holds all the cards, they hold all the power. And so the US was dubbed the world's superpower. And I think that's very interesting too, because Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, right? So all of a sudden, the US is not just the premier world power, but we are the super world power. And if we can just even bring this back to popular culture in the United States in the late 80s, this is also when the fast food restaurants all of a sudden began supersizing everything, which probably wasn't good for our waistlines, but it all goes along with this Sagittarian energy, the 29th degree of Sagittarian energy, where the exaggeration and expansion of Jupiter would just be at its height. I also want to say that the Saturn-Uranus conjunction is often linked to countries where they are changing the actual regime that rules the country. So where it hits a particular country, we'll see a change from, say, a democracy to an authoritarian regime, or a communist to a democracy regime. This is due to Uranus, the new ideas, and the rebellion coming into play with Saturn, which is the old guard. From 1999 to 2000, we had a Uranus square Saturn in the signs of Aquarius and Taurus, but they were reversed to what they are now. Saturn was in Taurus. Uranus was in Aquarius, its home sign. So Saturn usually rules Capricorn, so it was very happy to be in Taurus. This usually brings about falls of government or national economic crises. And in these years, we did have some financial difficulties, some big financial difficulties. We had challenges to globalization, and we witnessed exponential growth of the technology industry. and the world population, by the way. It just exploded with people. The internet, though, really impacted the way we change, the way we handle business, the way we talk to each other, the way we communicate with each other, and the way we handle business. And this also gave a big leg up to a lot of people who could not trade overseas, either from other countries to us or from us for us to other countries. So smaller businesses really began to get a boon from the internet right around this time, even though there was financial hardship being experienced all over the globe. Another thing that I want to mention about the Saturn Uranus square is that it also impacted global warming. So in the 1999 to 2000 era, that's when we began to experience extreme weather events. They began to be shown on the news in much greater detail and have much more attention than ever before. And this was when they started worrying in a much more tangible way about global warming. Whereas before we knew about global warming, we taught about it, things in school, and then we blew it off. But now in 99 and 2000, we began to see these events of terrible flooding, terrible volcanoes, tsunamis, earthquakes, mudslides, and they began to affect huge, huge numbers of people. And that's when it really came into the news. Now, the Saturn-Uranus opposition of 2007 and 2011, again, economics is affected. So this was when we had another financial crisis fund. It also affected a lot of businesses. If you recall, the car industry, many companies almost went under and had to be bailed out. Saturn was in Virgo and Uranus was in Pisces. So this was considered the worst financial crisis that the world had seen since the Great Depression in the 1930s. A lot of businesses failed during this time. But in the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, where all the little countries that had broken free of the Soviet Union had taken on capitalistic economic structures, and now all of their structures were coming into question and failing, and so they had to be propped up too, and they had to restructure their own economies in order to continue to exist. It was very bad for those former Soviet countries as far as the economics of their livelihood. Now we come to the square that we are currently living in 2021, Saturn-Uranus waning square. Uranus in Taurus and Saturn in Aquarius. And it's really a good thing that Saturn is in Aquarius in a fixed sign at the time of the pandemic, because it assures that the government will be impelled to take care of people, to take care of the masses, to do the right thing for the most number of people. And even Uranus being in Taurus also assures that for all the changes that we are asking for all of the upheaval and chaos and confusion and even violence that we are fighting for, our own survival, our comfort, our, having a roof over our head, having enough food to eat, having a good place to live, having a good education, having voter rights, having health care. We're fighting for these things, and Uranus in Taurus in an earth sign, in a fixed earth sign, assures that what people are asking for is not unreasonable. They're asking for basic comforts of life. So, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is basically what they're asking for. And so they're probably going to get it. But with Saturn in the mix there, it's going to be delayed and it's going to take a while, but it's going to happen in this era. It definitely is. Another thing that Dane Rudhyar said about the waning square for Saturn-Uranus, not only is a crisis in consciousness, that action is not required, it's thinking that requires. We have to change people's thinking, that people have to open their minds and understand why the new is good for them. Because a lot of this Saturn energy, especially Saturn in Aquarius, they can make these broad sweeping statements and say, well, it ain't broke, don't fix it, because their thinking is that things are okay. The people who are saying no and playing the Saturn role need to be shown why the changes will benefit everyone, including them, because everybody wants to benefit themselves ultimately. I think that's everybody's agenda. There's nothing really wrong with that. That's called survival. But if you're blocking progress just because you think it might inconvenience you, that's not good for the greater good. That's not the right thing for the greater good. Now, when Saturn and Uranus meet again in a conjunction, it will be 2032. And the conjunction will be in the sign of Gemini. So what does this mean? This could mean even more reform to our government. It could mean completely blowing up the way we look at government. We could have a completely different system or no system at all, maybe with Gemini. But I think globally, this is going to be just a lightning bolt to all of the governmental systems around the world. I think the internet will also be affected, but I don't think it'll go away. I think that the internet will become freer, more open. I think that the hardware and technology that runs the internet by 2032 will be minimal. I don't think we'll have this situation where everybody has to, wire up and have a company and all this stuff. I think that's going to go away. I think that's just a really, really Capricornian way of doing business, and I think that's over. And so when Saturn is in Gemini, it looks at the past for examples. So we may find in the past examples of how things work. For instance, think about Tesla. Tesla depended on crystals crystals work great for that. They're very stable. They're not like electricity. Electricity is not stable. Electricity depends on positive and negative ions banging all over the place. But crystals are very, very stable. So we could see a return to something that's still wireless, but more stable, like crystals. And you'll notice in the building of computers, they use a lot of silicon. Silicon is crystal dust. It's quartz crystal dust. That's what silicon is. So we do use quartz technology in our computers, but we're using them in addition to electricity. And I'm saying, just get rid of that. The electricity is, just bad. It's unstable. It goes kaflooey with the weather. It's unstable. Now, Uranus in Gemini is spotlighting thinking, communication, social media, the internet, breakout information that surprises or flouts traditional norms. So the combination of these is, and Uranus is also inspiration, brilliant thinking. And the combination of these two planets could bring about some just utterly mind-blowing innovation or innovations. It's Gemini, so it could be two, could be more than one innovation, right? I just need to drop this little bit into your consciousness. The last time that Uranus and Saturn were conjunct in Gemini was 1440. That is when Gutenberg invented the printing press. And that just blew open the doors of knowledge, because now you didn't have to be a king to have books in a library. You didn't even have to be an aristocrat, a nobleman, to have books in your library. Now you could actually buy a book if you had the money. But still, more and more and more common people, who probably some of them could read, now they could teach others to read. They could open up the books that were in existence. They didn't have to rely on a hand-copied book in order to read that book, which means that teaching expanded. It means that colleges could expand. It meant that the world could share knowledge because somebody could take a book to another country. So the possibilities for Saturn and Uranus conjunct in Gemini are really exciting. Again, it's not happening till 2032, but still it's inspirational, it's brilliance, it's information coming from the heavens, right? So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with that Saturn-Uranus conjunction. Okay, now let's discuss the actual square in June that's coming up. And the energies for this are going to be very similar to what happens in what happened in February and what happened in December. And now if we look at February, it was affected by a Mars connection to, I think it was Uranus, about a week after the January 6th insurrection, right? So that influenced it quite a bit. We were feeling the energy of this square way before it was perfected. And that's probably been the case all along, even with this one in June. We've been feeling the effects way beforehand because it's so strong, because it does really impact us a lot. And so this the last waning square of 2021 will happen will perfect rather on Christmas Eve, on December 24th. So that's a little gnarly, but we'll get through it. We've gotten through all the other ones. And it's all of the energy that I've been talking about, the newness, the rebelliousness, the individuality, the explosiveness of Uranus, but in an earth sign, in Taurus, juxtaposed to the cautiousness, the structure, the organization, the delay, the timing of Saturn. So very, very interesting. All right, so now what I'd like to look at is, let's look at the themes of Saturn square Uranus. Well, the first theme is responsible freedom. So this business of, you know, charging into the Capitol with guns, that's not responsible freedom. That's more of a Mars action. So I don't want to link the insurrection too closely to Saturn square Uranus. I think Mars is more at work there. Cautious innovation. Again, it seems like, you know, brand new stuff, but it's cautious. It's couched in time-worn ideas and tradition and knowledge, or it's couched in science. Liberation through routine. Anybody who's ever practiced any kind of like yoga or any kind of spiritual devotional practice knows that as you go through that routine, it is liberating. You don't have to make a decision about doing the routine, you just do it. And as you do it, there is a lifting of your burden. There's a lifting of your worries, of your stress, because the routine is taking over. And whether this is a meditation routine or a yoga routine or a exercise routine or a cooking routine, whatever it is, routine does tend to liberate you by alleviating the stress. And that's something that will come through with Saturn Uranus square too. Another aspect of this is that you see the problem, you attempt a solution, and the solution brings about more problems. This is where, to me, I think of this more in terms of the illumination of the problem is actually showing you more problems. Not necessarily the solution, but it can be the solution too, brings more problems. And then the transcendence of time and causality, Uranus being the transcendence and Capricorn being the time and causality. So there are a lot of things that are going to be happening over the whole year, not just in February, June, and December, but over the whole year. You're going to see these things playing out over and over and over again because of the strength of Saturn-Uranus square. And all of this is going to challenge our assumed norms in the world. These are the dynamics that are at play with the square. We will be seeing the conservative challenge the progressive. We will see the security, our own security versus being able to have adventures. We will see age challenging youth and youth challenging age. We will see materialism versus idealism. Now I'd like to go over the shadow qualities because everything has a light and a dark side to it. There will be tension between the past and future, and we've heard this over and over again. If you turn on the news at all, you will inevitably see, you know, some old white guy talking about the way it used to be. We also see a lot of sudden shocks and rude awakenings. And this is just typical of 2021. I know we saw a lot of this in 2020, but we're continuing to see it in 2021. And as we're looking at it, I don't think we're getting numb to it. I think we're getting angry. And peaceful protesting is great, and writing letters and making phone calls. Those things are all really good ways to respond to these difficult things that we're seeing happening and play out right in front of us. There is a hyper responsibility and a hyper vigilance aspect to this. And we will see a lot of people go to extremes in their defending of their ideals and ideas. Right now, it's going to be hyper, and probably for the rest of the year, it's going to be like this. It is also irresponsible or harmful rebellions. There is also the other side of the coin. And in the shadow side, we do see the darker realities of these aspects. And harmful rebellion, I mean, how many people have we seen killed? How many people have we seen injured? The negative side of modern science and technology is always going to be used for ill. The positive side of science and technology can be used for the greater good. And that's where we want to go. The endless compromise that results in virtually no action whatsoever. And atheist utopias. Now, this came from an author that is a lot more knowledgeable about Saturn square Uranus than I am. So I've included it. I don't quite know how to explain this except to say that there are people who describe things that cannot be. And that's a feature of Saturn square Uranus. You know, they're playing on our fears and generation gaps. There are going to be just huge differences between the old and the young. Saturn square Uranus dates in 2021. So, of course, Saturn entered Aquarius back in December 2020, and Mars squared Saturn just after the Capitol riots on January 6th. Mars squared Saturn on January 13th. And I think that contributed to the high velocity, high volatility of that day. Then we have on January 20th, which was Inauguration Day, we had Mars conjunct Uranus. And it was a surprising inauguration. I mean, I must say, I was kind of on tenterhooks wondering how it would come off and what would happen. Would anybody try anything? And so I was happily surprised that it was just inspiring in a very Uranian way. It was very modern and it was very polished and professional, which is the Saturn part of it, but it had such a breath of fresh air with all of the people who were involved with it. And then on February 17th, of course, we had the actual perfected square of Saturn and Uranus. Then in May, Saturn turned retrograde, and Saturn is still retrograde now while we are experiencing the perfection of the Saturn-Uranus waning square on June 14th. Mars will be opposite Saturn on July 4th, and Mars will be squaring Uranus on July 3rd. So I want to say that July is going to be probably a month that might have some violence in it. We may have some violent events, although we've been having violent events almost daily since the beginning of the year. So like same old, I guess. But it's connecting to that Saturn and Uranus who have been in square. So I think that might be bad, because look up here, we had Saturn squaring Uranus just a week after that insurrection at the Capitol. So end of June, beginning of July, I think that's going to be a very difficult time. I think I'm going to stay in my house. Then we have Uranus Saturn rather, turning direct all the way into October. Nothing else happens. So hopefully July, August, September will be cool as a cucumber. But Saturn doesn't turn direct until October 10th. And this list is not to say that this is the only astrological stuff happening. It's just that these are the things that are happening that concern Saturn and Uranus. Then in November, we have Mars square Saturn. So there might be some tension going on there. Then we have Mars opposing Uranus on November 17th. So there's a little theme here. We have it from July we have this interesting Mars opposite Saturn, and then we have down here Mars opposite Uranus in November. Then on July 3rd, we have the Mars square Uranus, and here we have the Mars square Saturn on November 10th. So I'm looking to see some reciprocity between these two sets of dates. So something that happens around the beginning of July, either the last week of June or maybe even the second week of July, and something that happens around mid-November are going to be linked in some way. And then finally, we have the actual square of Saturn and Uranus on December 24th. What can we expect in 2021 when Saturn squares Uranus? And it's already done it now in June. It's for the second time. Continued political and personal unrest, political and domestic violence, new and different ideas becoming a reality, and all the work and effort that entails, updating the rules to match new realities and modern truths, change and excitement collide with societal rules and traditions, testing the limits of freedom. That's a big one. The young versus the old. Let's not forget about the GameStop story. And progressive versus conservative. New ideas versus the old way of doing things. The pressure to change versus resistance to the new. Earth changes, climate change, especially earthquakes, mudslides, and erosion. Volatility in financial markets, cybersecurity is a real front burner issue, and technology glitches, network disruption, electrical grids, all of these things are going to be affected even more and more and more as we go through 2021. So thank you so much for watching. I really love doing these videos where I connect astrological happenings to historical data. I think it's so informative, and I think it helps you learn really how astrology affects us in our everyday life. Fun. Here's a beautiful picture of Uranus to cap us off. And let's go back to Saturn. If you would like to get a reading from me, please check out the contact information in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And please, please, please leave me a comment. I really love reading your comments and communicating with you and getting to know you. And you're my tribe. You're my very, very faithful viewers. So I'm very thankful that you're here all the time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.